Let me start off by saying this. Thank you, 343. I was invited to a behind closed doors media session which included a commentated playthrough of the same demo we had just seen at the showcase, along with a little Q&A session which provided some additional insights into what was shown. And I've spent a lot of time thinking, piecing all of these components together, what I saw with my own eyes, how 343 themselves were describing the showing, along with the reaction following the reveal of this new Halo game. And if you're excited about Halo Infinite, I'm really happy for you. I saw a lot of those live reactions. I saw people nearly break down into tears. They were so happy, and far be it from me to tell you you shouldn't feel that way. But I also saw a lot of disappointment, or indifference, or disappointment at their indifference, disappointment that they didn't feel excited. So look, what you're about to hear is my opinion. I'm going to be as detailed as I can to demonstrate why I feel the way I do, and if you don't want rain on your parade, if you don't want your hype killed, best ye look away. But I hope you would challenge yourself and see if what I have to say makes sense and set your expectations accordingly. But if not, go enjoy yourself. We're going to get started. Hope everyone who feels that way has clicked out, because this game does not look good. And I'm not just talking about the visuals. But you know what? I guess we could start there. Painfully, the one thing I thought was going to be a complete non-issue. Everything we had seen so far looked great. The box art they revealed the day before looked outstanding. It looked like we were going to get a classic style, but that demo, that did not look good. And everyone's saying, oh, it's an old build, and the small campaign trailer they showed afterwards, that looks better. Go watch the Digital Foundry video. I already have. Look, bottom line, it didn't look good and it needed to. Now, I'm not a graphics guy. I'm in the boat that gameplay matters far more than graphics, so this isn't a deal breaker for me if Infinite doesn't end up launching as the best looking game of all time. But it's been 5 years. This console has been touted as a graphical powerhouse. Halo is the premier franchise for that console, and this is the first time ever the world has seen it. It needed to make a good impression, and it has done the opposite. So much so that a lot of folks have just gone into straight damage control mode. Old build, unfinished, etc., and we're only a few months out. Now, this has happened with Halo before. When people used to compare games like Killzone to Halo and complained, oh, Halo doesn't look good graphically, but that's because Halo was stylized. And looking back, I think games like Halo 3 still hold up better today. What is concerning, though, is Halo Infinite being unfavorably compared to Halo 3. Now, I don't buy it, but it shouldn't even be close enough to have the discussion. And people are saying this is our fault. Oh, you wanted a simpler classic art style, and now you're complaining that you got it. I really don't think art style is the issue here. When we said simple, we didn't mean literal hexagon primitives plastered throughout the environment. Like, even if the lighting and shadows and stuff like that get improved, it's not going to make these hexagons any more interesting. People are comparing this game to Minecraft and Mega Bloks. I heard one person say it looks like they took Halo Wars 2's graphics and just plopped you on the ground, and that's an RTS. So I'll let someone else go into the details graphically. I consider graphics a bonus. If something looks great, awesome, but if not, well, okay, is it fun then? And that's me. But this game visually, if I could sum it up in a word, looks lifeless. Well, what about the space in between the hexagons? What about the actual game, the gameplay? Does it look fun? It looks to be some sort of open world, or at least semi-open world. What sort of potential does that have for a franchise like Halo? There's a lot to dive into here. Some good, mostly bad. The good that I saw. It's clearly trying to be a sandbox-driven game. Something we've talked about a lot on this channel is how to implement new mechanics. You can either attach them to the player, like how Halo 5 gave you Spartan Charge, Ground Pound, Thrust, Sliding, Air Stabilizers, etc., and those were innate player abilities, compared to the classic games, where mechanics were more emphasized in the sandbox and pieces surrounding the player. And we see that a lot in this demo. They show off a ton of new weapons. At one point, Chief picks up something called a drop wall and uses it to deflect a grenade. You have more potential interactables like the ability to pick up and throw fusion coils, perfectly good additions that fit nicely with Halo's core principles. I also saw a lot of distinct AI behaviors. It's been confirmed brutes can throw suicide grunts at you. At one point, a brute charges at Chief, and it is shown that the player can shoot them in the legs, causing them to stumble and slow down. These are Halo principles. These are the types of interactions and additions that players like myself have advocated for. Mechanics attached to the environment, the sandbox, the AI. If you watched my video, Why Halo Struggles to Evolve, These are all things we've discussed here. And 343 has clearly made an attempt to incorporate these elements in Infinite. They refer to it as a sandbox-driven experience. Here's a direct quote. Halo has always been defined by its sandbox, the collection of weapons, vehicles, and characters that fuel emergent gameplay and freeform encounters throughout the campaign. In Halo Infinite, the team is building on the legacy of this iconic sandbox while evolving and infusing it with new offerings. If that was the end of the story, we'd be in good shape, but it isn't. And 343 just can't help themselves. They don't have complete faith in a game that fully embraces that, and instead, it appears we are getting the dreaded middle ground that I have been worried about for such a long time. Despite 343 referring to this as a spiritual reboot, Infinite will have at least sprint, clambering, and sliding. If you're out of the loop and one of those fine folks who hear that and think, so, what's wrong with sprinting? Are you telling me people really take issue with running? It doesn't seem like a big deal to me. If you consider yourself in that class, absolutely no problem. I'm glad you're here. In the description, you will find a collection of arguments that I have prepared over the years highlighting why features such as this are detrimental to the Halo formula. I'd encourage you to take a look and let me know what you think. Otherwise, we're going to keep going. The existence of these mechanics mean a lot of the same controversies that have persisted throughout the Halo community for years will continue to persist in Infinite. Mechanically, this game will not play like the Halo games Infinite is clearly trying to harken back to, but even worse, mechanically this game looks like it'll play a lot like just about everything else. It could not be more generic. A couple months ago, I made a video called Why Halo Will Fail If It Follows Trends. I have a segment in that video talking about how foundationally so many games nowadays use the exact same underlying base mechanics, how they all use sprinting and sliding and clambering with a couple wrinkles thrown in here and there. Halo Infinite looks like it is literally that, plus a grappling hook, and we'll talk about that thing in a second. Now, some people have pointed out, I think it'll be okay, because sprinting looks really slow. I mean, just take a look at it. It doesn't seem very fast. It doesn't look like it'll be useful. You don't need it. And they say that like it'll somehow make everybody feel better. But as one of those players that argues against its inclusion, it honestly just pisses me the fuck off because it's still there. It's never been a balancing concern for classic Halo fans. It's always been what it does to the game on a fundamental level, how it changes level design, sandbox design, AI encounters, etc. It's still going to be detrimental to all the things we've considered it detrimental for, but the worst part is now it looks like it's gonna feel like shit for the people who actually want it in the game. And this is the problem. This is the middle ground I have feared, and it's basically going to end up being the theme of the day. Making sprint feel useless isn't going to make both sides of the fan base happy. It is far more likely to leave both feeling dissatisfied. Removing half of Halo 5's options and going for some mechanical middle ground like Infinite looks to be doing, the classic fans still won't like it. But now, the Halo 5 fans who liked the unique experience it offered, well, now you've hurt their experience. We didn't see any thruster packs or stabilizers or ground pounds or any of those player options, and I don't want them. But if you make what you do have feel bad, and you remove these abilities, which are very important mechanics in regards to offering the mobile Halo 5 experience, the entire fan base you've grown around that game is going to potentially be just as ostracized. That's literally where Halo's at now. We praise something because it looks like it feels like shit. Now, people who just love Halo because it says Halo on the box, or people who don't really care too much about mechanical consistency, they're going to be fine. And you know what? They'd have probably been fine no matter what. But the gameplay-driven sub-communities are going to be damaged because of this middle ground. At least that's what I predict. Now, this is just the campaign. We don't know anything about multiplayer yet, and that's where we will really see how much of these mechanics affect the community long-term. But even where the campaign is concerned, I see things that worry me. I see compromises and contradictions in philosophy because clearly, despite the good things, like the new sandbox elements and emphasis on those elements, they still seem keen on attaching mechanics to the player, making them more mobile, giving them more agency, again, still clinging to principles they held with Halo 5 and trying to find a middle ground. Fav, I mean, it's an open world game. We need sprint and mobility options. How else are we supposed to get around? As Chief literally sprints to a warthog. But let's finally talk about the grappling hook and how it's implemented in the campaign and how it is used in the context of this new open play space. It appears in the campaign to be a permanent upgrade. At one point in the demo, when Chief picks up the drop wall, it temporarily occupies the button that utilizes the grapple hook. But when the drop wall is thrown, the grapple hook reappears, which tells me the grapple hook, or the grapple shot is what they're calling it, acts as some sort of default ability, especially since the drop wall appears to be a one-time one-time use and the grapple shot just recharges after it's used. Side note, I noticed the grapple shot occupies the right bumper for the beginning of the demo, then when the drop ball is picked up, also seemingly activated by right bumper and is used, the grapple hook reappears as a left bumper function, so either something weird mechanically is going on that we don't know about, or the UI needs some polishing up. But the main point is it looks to be a more permanent baseline addition with far more functionality, and there's some things I like about it. I like the fact that despite it functioning as a base trait, it is used to facilitate a lot of sandbox interactions, like pulling yourself to enemies, or pulling a fusion coil to you and then being able to throw it. It was asked in the post-conference media briefing whether or not it was physics-based, like is it based on weight, could you pull a grunt towards you, and it is not. It was described as pulling weapons and interactables towards you, but pulling you towards enemies, and of course also works as environmental traversal. And this was like the star of the show. Oh boy, a grapple hook. I've never seen one of those in a game before. I can't wait to explore an open or semi-open world with that. Well, here's what deeply concerns me about it, and it doesn't concern me for my own enjoyment, I'm already uninterested, but I find it concerning for just audiences in general. When you consider typical open world designs, and you consider the new presumably omnipresent or regularly present additions like the grapple shot and the still bog standard agency that sprint, clamber, and sliding give you at a base level, all of that to me contradicts Halo gameplay and the sandbox elements they are simultaneously trying to showcase. That's a long-winded way of saying they're trying to cater to both at the same time, and I don't think it's going to work. Theme of the day. But why do I think that? Well, when you think traditional open world experiences, they typically operate off of player empowerment and player choice. They focus on exploration and discovery and progression. I mean, why would you go exploring if there's nothing worthwhile to find? And their encounters typically require player expression and creativity to deliver fun, as opposed to a more curated and controlled, specifically designed encounter. So Infinite once again finds itself in a pickle. Does it lean into the traditional style of Halo encounter where developers use AI and sandbox elements to create a sort of combat puzzle, or does it go for the more free-form expression? I'm gonna tackle this however I want and upgrade my character and have a lot of agency. Sometimes this is referred to make your own fun. Or does it try to do both? And that's once again what it looks like, and I'm once again skeptical they can pull it off. Obviously, a grapple hook is absurd in regards to player agency, but we can also see in the demo when Chief pulls up his TAC map, as 343 calls it, that there is a tab for upgrades, which hint towards at a player progression system, RPG Lite maybe, with unlocks. So why does that contradict the sandbox elements that were just shown? Because the more powerful I am, the more I can circumvent the sandbox. The more agency and decisions you give to me, the less your sandbox even matters. And I'll give you a perfect example that I've used before. Once again, take a look at the Scarab fight from Halo 3 on the mission The Storm. Now, we all know how to beat it in 20 seconds. Some of us have played it a dozen times, but this segment perfectly illustrates what a sandbox game is. You, with your simple mechanics, just walking, jumping, and shooting, are tasked with destroying this giant scarab. This is a curated, specifically designed encounter. The tools you need are in the environment. You can use rocket launchers and mongooses to try and shoot its legs, bring it to the ground, and board it. You can use the missile pods. You can find a grav lift and try to use that to board it, or you can use the environment. There's a large crane that you can take the elevator up and walk across, and if you time it right, you can jump on the scarab. You put that same encounter in Halo Infinite, grapple hook. Yeah, I'll just use the grapple hook. I mean, duh. Do you see how that one addition to the player nullifies those pieces of the sandbox? And that's why when we've been talking about sandbox-oriented design, we've talked about it in the context of classic Halo, because that's the formula that works best with it. That simplicity encourages you to utilize the sandbox, hell, it downright requires it. And when it comes to those types of timeless, memorable Halo encounters, Infinite will struggle to provide them. As for the more open world, player agency-driven encounters, which are satisfying in their own right, I'm not going to act like that has no chance of being fun. I don't think they'll be as fun as the combat puzzles Halo used to provide, and I also can play a lot of other games that offer that open world style. Open world may be new to Halo, but it is very, very played out in regards to the gaming landscape at large. So while I think there is potential for open world style gameplay in the Halo universe, and we've seen open level design like on the Silent Cartographer in CE work wonders, as well as, the ODST hub world, It's going to be very difficult for Infinite to strike that balance. And while we might gain some sense of exploration, which I think is very exciting for Halo, I will be shocked if they can pull it off without losing something along the way. I hope they can. I hope it's the best of both worlds, but that route has not typically gone over very well for 343, so consider me pessimistic. Again, trying to find a middle ground. If you don't have the progression and worthwhile exploration, then you lose a lot of potential that an open world game has to offer. But if you offer that progression and lean into the open-ended gameplay that style allows, I think you might lose a lot of potential that Halo has to offer. We've only seen 8 minutes of footage, but already that's the direction I'm leaning, especially with the grapple hook. Like, we talk about how additional player abilities affect a designer's ability to control an encounter. The grapple hook as an ever-present ability is maybe the most uncontrollable thing Halo could ever have, and I wouldn't be surprised if all those stupid hexagons everywhere were partially conceived in order to contain the geometry and act as boundaries to keep the grapple hook from breaking everything, but that's just speculation. So it clearly demonstrates Halo elements. It says it's sandbox driven, but it also still clearly emphasizes player agency, and to what degree that overshadows and contradicts those elements, we will have to wait and see. I hope this is an open world that does Halo justice, because if it ends up being open world Halo Far Cry, then this campaign isn't going to hold up. It's not good enough to just be another open world game, but it's Halo this time, therefore it's special. No, it has to make an open world serve its sandbox, not just try to put its sandbox in an open world. And when you consider what I just described in my observations, when you see the TAC map and the objective markers and the fact this mission they showcased is a generic rule of threes assault these encampments objective, when you see the language 343 uses in their press release, such as, the scale of the environment accessible to players is several times larger than the last 2 Halo games combined, with opportunities to discover hidden rewards and assault banished fortifications in brand new ways. If that doesn't sound like the same old jargon you've heard hundreds of times from Ubisoft, I don't know what does. I mean, banished fortifications. Sounds like Halo Bandit camps to me. Prove me wrong, 343, because as a Halo fan, even if I end up not liking the multiplayer, I can at least like the story. I can at least like the world. I can at least like the campaign experience. But this was not a good first impression. And unfortunately, I'm not done. Another thing they mentioned in their press release was this line right here, and I think it's very interesting. When discussing the new abilities, which they called equipment, they said this: and yes, these new additions to the sandbox will also carry over to multiplayer. However, they'll function a bit differently as equipment items that can be picked up on the map. We look forward to talking about multiplayer details soon. A couple things. The fact that they felt compelled to make a distinction that yes, the grapple shot is in multiplayer, but it will be different. It'll be a pickup. That tells me in campaign it isn't a pickup, and it is a major key. It's essentially a base mechanic, which everything kind of already pointed to. It also shows that they have a semblance of an understanding that would be very problematic in multiplayer. It shows they understand the amount of concern that would cause, so much so that despite not sharing any multiplayer details whatsoever, they felt compelled to clear the air about that one specific thing. And is that a good thing? Obviously, yes. If I think the grapple shot has the potential to damage campaign engagements, it as a base trait would be catastrophic in multiplayer. Hell, I wish and kinda hope they make it a pickup in campaign for all the reasons I stated earlier. As a pickup in multiplayer, I have no issue with the grapple shot. If it sucks, if it ruins the experience of a map, just remove it. No harm, no foul. And I think its inclusion has the potential to make really cool custom games, so no, I don't think the grapple shot will ruin multiplayer. That does not mean I think the multiplayer will be good. Because when you take away the grapple hook, Infinite could not be more generic in regards to its base mechanics. It literally could not be more generic. It just leaves it as a standard run-of-the-mill shooter where you sprint, slide, and clamber. That's gonna make a lot of classic fans annoyed, and if the multiplayer is lacking the other pieces of Halo 5's kit, like thrust and stabilize, I don't think it's going to make those fans happy either. But it's even worse than that, because when you take an ability like clamber and you put it in a game like Halo 5, it's not as detrimental. It's not. The game already has tons of mobility and player agency, so clamber is kind of just a drop in the pond. In fact, it kind of helps to anchor you to the geometry and give you more control of your movement. But if you remove a bunch of those linking pieces and you put it in a game that's not classic but more simple, it's more detrimental. It still damages the game in a lot of the ways we've argued about. Again, see the videos linked in the description. but then it lacks the options around it to be used in the ways that were beneficial for it in Halo 5. I know I sound like I'm a broken record, but if this is how Infinite plays, it's going to be a middle ground that I think fails to satisfy both sides, and rather leaves both sides wanting more. Not saying nobody will like it, but surely you can see the conflict. It's worse than being polarizing. It's uninteresting. Now, this is all being deduced based on what we've seen in the campaign and one little nugget that was given to us in the press release. We know Infinite's mechanics, we know it's going to have on-map pickups, but that's kind of it, right? Well, maybe there's a few more nuggets we can find in this campaign demo. Let's talk about weapons. If your game is going to be sandbox driven with a very standard set of base mechanics, your weapons better be straight fire. Did you know this demo showed us 5 guns we have never seen in the franchise before? Wow, that's a lot. That's good. New guns, sandbox driven game, that's what we want. The problem is none of them did anything we haven't seen before. Every new gun was so cookie cutter, so formulaic and redundant. Now, Halo's always had a bit of redundancy in its sandbox, even in the Bungie era, but this is next level. A generic assault rifle, but with a slower fire rate and a scope. A battle rifle, but it's plasma this time. This gun basically is the same thing, only with rounds that slightly arc and cause splash damage. It's just a grab bag of the same attributes being used in various combinations, and the game itself literally tells you that's what it is. If you watch closely in the demo, when Chief picks up a new weapon, it highlights its details. Now, maybe I'm asking too much, but I'd like weapons that are a little more interesting than this. Weapons that have unique functions, that create unique gameplay. Something more than just shotgun, kinetic, spread. Oh boy, it's the shotgun, but it's got slightly adjusted attributes. The new gameplay opportunities are endless. I mean, it's literally like they took all the weapon classes, all of the ammo types or faction types in the different firing modes and threw them into bags. Then they pull out 3 and went, oh, okay, rifle, plasma, burst rifle. Cool, that's a new gun. It's like they're selling you redundancy as a feature. And I don't care how many new weapons Infinite has. If they're not interesting in creating new potential gameplay, then they're failing to serve a sandbox-driven experience. When you get past the newness of a gun, its sounds, its effects, what you have are mechanics. And these guns, so far, do not seem mechanically interesting, and I find that concerning for the campaign and multiplayer. What about the new equipment? They called it equipment. They said it will act as on-map pickups like equipment. Clearly, they are trying to associate it with the Halo 3 system. Isn't that great? This isn't equipment. So, in Halo 3, equipment were neutral abilities. If I threw a bubble shield, it affected me the same way it affected my opponent. My only advantage was that I controlled when and where it was used. Certainly an advantage, but not without also sometimes hindering you. For instance, you had cover, but you couldn't shoot back. Same with the regen field. If an enemy walked in it, they'd be healed. Same with the grav lift. Anybody could use it. The grapple shot and the drop wall are designed to strictly benefit the player, at least most of the time. If I pick up a grapple shot, I become more powerful. If I pick up a drop wall, I can shoot out of the side that I'm on. It's really something completely different. It's not equipment, and it's not like I think Halo 3's equipment was executed all that great, and maybe there's pieces we haven't seen that will be more neutral and less just strict upgrades. But do you think an energy field that people can hide behind and shoot you from in multiplayer sounds fun? It's new, but I'm not sure it's fun. And the neutral nature of Halo 3's equipment at least acted as a self-check and balance. Like, hey, this can be used against me if I don't use it right. And these abilities seem more one-sided. Maybe not totally, but I think you get the picture. Well, I'm spent. I know this is a lot to pull from 8 minutes of footage, but this is how I think about game design. And when I see what Infinite just showed us, and I followed the trail of its influence and pieced all of these components together, my heart sank. The game doesn't visually look good. I don't think it's mechanically interesting, and all of its potential looks to be compromised or overshadowed by 343's attempt at finding a middle ground that I just don't think exists. Sure, there's a lot we haven't seen, and I would love nothing more than to be proven wrong about all of this. If you can come back to this video a year from now and make me eat crow and show me that Infinite was the best thing ever and the most beloved Halo game ever made, nobody would love that more than me. But this is what I see. And this is what I believe, and as much as I'd like to join you all on the Infinite hype train, I have to stay behind and stick to my gut. The game doesn't look ready. Flat out, plain and simple. It was utterly underwhelming, and that doesn't bode well for Halo's future. And as a fan of this franchise for what is about to be 2 decades, I am terrified of the final product. And no, I don't mean, oh, it's just not for me. No, fuck that. I'm worried it might just be a bad game. Like, I'm getting Anthem vibes. Something feels wrong. So, I hope I'm wrong. I don't say this because I hate Halo. I say this because I've loved it since I was a little kid. But I loved it because it was good. I loved it because Halo was special, not just because it said Halo on the box. And I want Halo to be special again. Till next time.